Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews, and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tygers.
When it comes to the fly fishing world, Tom Rosenbauer needs little introduction. From joining Orvis straight from college, he has also authored over 20 fly fishing books, written numerous articles, and hosts one of the most downloaded fly fishing podcasts. There isn't much he hasn't seen or done in what so far has been a highly successful career. In this episode, we cover plenty of ground talking about home water, flies, do we need to carry lots of flies, trout fishing, saltwater fishing, spey casting, and so much more. I hope you enjoy this special 150th episode of the Fly Culture Podcast.
Tom, huge thanks for being my guest on the 150th episode of the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good, Pete, and it's a great honor to be part of this anniversary.
It's great to have you along, and it must be nice to be the other side of the mic for a change, mustn't it?
Well, you know, it is, but I've been on 4 other people's podcasts this week. Everybody has a podcast.
That's the price of being popular, I guess, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but you know, you told me some of the questions you're going to ask, and those are some good ones. I appreciate your thoughtfulness in asking these questions because they sound pretty interesting.
And are you still enjoying doing them as much as ever?
Yeah, you know, it's I put more time. I think I put more time into preparing the podcast and searching out guests than I ever did before. It was kind of in between all my other responsibilities at Orvis, and I had to go downstairs to a little podcast studio that was pretty grim. It was a closet, and now I do all my work from home, and I have a room in the basement, and I have more time because it's more part of my official job now as ambassador. They call me the chief enthusiast. So yeah, and you know, I just try to get more and more interesting guests, and it's been great. I love it.
And I've always found with my little one that finding the backstory of the person is also a really interesting part of it. Is that something, I know I've listened to many of yours, is that something you enjoy doing too?
Well, you know, I don't search out their backstory, but usually it comes out in the process.
No, I really enjoy that aspect of it and finding out about them, not just as a fly angler, but also what they think about things and how they approach things. I've always found really, really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It really is. Because everybody approaches it differently.
Yeah, absolutely. So for our listeners, can you tell us a little bit about where you're based? I recall mine. It looks like a little closet as well. I'm hoping they'll unlock the door at some stage. So I've been in here a little while now. Can you tell? I'm in a
spare bedroom in my basement, and it's nice and quiet. We have an 8-week-old puppy, so hopefully he will be. He's far enough away because my wife just left to pick up my son at school, so I'm home alone with a puppy.
Oh, fantastic! What sort of puppy?
It's a Labrador, an Irish lineage. I have a 6-year-old from the same breeder, from the same lineage, and I really like the English and Irish dogs better than the American Labs.
And do they come fishing with you?
No, I don't believe in taking dogs fishing. I think they're a pain in the butt. You know, you have to have an extremely obedient, patient dog to take it fishing. And I've seen very few in my lifetime.
Yeah, mine has his moments. He does come fishing with me all the time. We were out this morning and he gets it and he won't swim through a pool. He knows, though, even if I get to the end of the run and wind in, he thinks something's happening, and he gets excited. But generally, I'm pretty lucky with him, and he's been fishing from 6 months old, so he's 6 now, funnily enough, and I think kind of gets it. So we'll be out tomorrow, no doubt, and hope he continues to behave so well. But can you tell me a little bit about where you're based and where you would consider your home water and what it actually means to you as well?
Yeah, well, I'm based in southern Vermont. It's a small state. It's the second smallest state in the United States as far as population is concerned, and it's quite rural. It's very peaceful. It's very safe. It's a great place to raise kids. Uh, it's mountainous, but low mountains, not like the Rocky Mountains, certainly, but low, older mountains. Um, I live in a dairy farming valley and I don't have any visible neighbors. I my my house looks over a small trout stream and some mountains, and I have the little stream in my backyard that has wild browns and rainbows and occasionally a few wild brook trout. So it's a little piece of heaven. The state just came in and electroshocked my backyard yesterday, and we were quite delighted with the population. There were it's a small stream, very small, shallow stream. The way to cross it most places in wellies, but they electroshocked I think 3 fish over 20 inches, wild brown trout. So yeah, so I never catch those fish. Well, I'll catch them maybe once a year in April on a streamer, but I never see them once the water drops. So.
I seem to remember on one of your podcasts you mentioned one that you had on a streamer one time a little while back.
Yeah.
But that sounds wonderful. Does that mean it's the sort of place that you'll head just for a couple of hours and clear the head or catch a few fish? Or I guess you've tried some product down there as well over the years, haven't you?
Yeah, it's nice to have it in your backyard. I fish it. I don't fish it probably more than I fish other places. Because I like to go down and look at the fish and observe them, and so I don't always fish for them. And they're quite difficult when the water drops in the summertime. They're almost impossible to approach and get a cast over. But I like knowing they're there. But we have a wealth of small trout streams in my area of Vermont, so I can go within 10, 15 minutes to 4 or 5 different little trout streams when I go fishing.
It's fascinating to me that you say that, because so many people I speak to that have streams incredibly close, and certainly more so in the UK if it's going through their land, that they don't seem to fish them in quite the same way, in the sense of it's I'm going to go down there today, I'll go down there tomorrow, this is my own water and I'll keep fishing it. And I hear that story so often. Is it the case, do you think, because it's so close and you know it's there, that you don't need to be there all the time?
I think that's true, Pete. I just like knowing they're there. And, a few years back, the trout population had crashed. We had some very low water and I wasn't seeing many fish. And I was complaining to my wife and told her I was depressed every time I walked down the stream because I didn't see fish. And now knowing the fish are there just makes me happy.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I know it's funny. I was talking to somebody the other day about salmon fishing, and I know we were talking off mic beforehand. And it's funny because I've had so few to have a go at, you start to question everything you're doing and probably overanalyze it sometimes. Do you ever find yourself in that situation?
I do. I think, and again, my wife can tell you that it's not an uncommon occurrence for me to come home and say, God, I suck at fishing. Why, I've devoted my whole life to this thing. I'm never writing another book. I'm no good. What am I going to do with my life? I can't catch a fish to save my life. I question it all the time.
And is that one of the things that makes us keep coming back, do you think?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. If it was too easy, we would be bored with it.
Yeah. And are you, as an angler, how would you describe yourself? Do you just go out and enjoy it all? Are you solitary? Do you like company? How do you what's a good day's fishing for you? Or is it a mix of all of them?
Yeah, I used to be more solitary. I used to really not enjoy anyone else's company on the river. I would go to the Catskills and I would fish for 3 or 4 days and not talk to a single person. And I started to realize that that's not really that healthy. And I still enjoy going on a small stream, a small trout stream by myself because there's nobody around. But I more and more, I find that I'll call a buddy and, excuse me, I'll call a buddy and say, hey, let's go here, let's go there. And it's a small stream, we switch off. And if, we do a lot of carp fishing, I really enjoy carp fishing. And that's a lot more carp fishing, I find, and saltwater fishing are a lot more fun with a pal. And carp fishing in particular, because you're always trying to figure them out, and it's good to bounce ideas off someone else. And, one person will pull my canoe, or my friends, we pull a drift boat, which is not really ungainly. But yeah, I do find more and more that I enjoy fishing with one of my buddies.
Yeah, I think there is that. We've talked about it many times on the podcast, and finding the right fishing buddy is a really
that's so important. Oh, that's so important. I mean, I have some very good friends that I would never fish with. I'm really fussy about my fishing buddies, and luckily, I work with people like Pete Kutzer, the casting guru, or the Sean Combs, the product developers, Jesse Haller. I fish a lot with the product developers at Orvis. And so I'm lucky enough to have these, equally passionate kind of dawn to dusk fishing buddies, because I'm a dawn to dusk person. I don't give up. I stay on the water as long as I possibly can. And it's hard to find someone who, doesn't want to break for lunch or dinner or whatever and wants to keep going. Hard to find those people.
Yeah. And that moment, like you say, when you're sharing a rod or you're working up a stream together, and it's knowing, I think the ultimate test is almost where there's a big one rising. You don't mind your buddy having that shot, and you're equally as pleased when they catch it as well. That's I think is the test, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's taken me about 55 years to get to that point.
Yeah, I'm with you. I've had some train wrecks, I must admit, but the interviewing process is a very strict one now, I must admit. So we'll see. But you say you like to figure things out, and does that mean then you get home from a day on the water and then you'll sit down perhaps at the vice because you've seen something, or it may be you're in the stream on your land and you've seen something? Does that mean you might sit down and make a really subtle little change to a pattern that you'd been working on, or something that you'd been using that needed a little tweak? Are you one of those sorts of people? I think I know the answer to this, but want to answer anyway.
I love nothing better than to come back from a day of fishing and tinker with a fly. Trout fishing, when you fly to someplace, it's tough to take fly tying stuff because of weight restrictions in it. But when I drive to the Catskills or Pennsylvania or somewhere, I always take fly tying material. When I go bone fishing, because you don't need a lot for bonefish flies, I will always take fly tying material. And there's nothing better, than coming back and tweaking a pattern.
I bet the bonefish guides love it when you turn up because they know these are going to be fantastically tied flies. Usually my experience of bone fishing is they look through your box, shake their head, throw it in the boat somewhere, and then pull out one that they've been using, and that's usually the fly. But I guess somebody like yourself, that they're thinking, these are the flies.
Every time, Pete, every time. I have I think 3 or 4 boxes of bonefish flies and probably a couple boxes of permit flies. And they will look through a box and they'll say, you got anything else? And I'll say, yeah, I got this box. You got anything else? And they'll keep going. You got anything else? And they'll pull out a gotcha or something that I don't have. Yeah, no, it happens to me. It happens to me every time. Every time.
I feel so much better. I'm sure so many people listening will feel so much better. You've heard it here from the maestro. Don't tie any flies for a bone fishing trip. It's a pointless exercise.
Well, tie them, and you put it down when the guy isn't looking. But
So the answer, I guess, I know to this one then. Are you somebody, because I've been thinking about this, and the flies I'm carrying, let's talk about the trout stream I fish and generally the trout fishing that I'm doing. I've found that I've cut down the amount of patterns that I'm carrying. Are you somebody, given our last part of the conversation, does it mean you carry lots of flies, or do you carry those sort of variations of fewer sorts of patterns?
Well, on our small streams, I carry one fly box with everything, nymphs, a couple of streamers, and a bunch of big dries, because I know exactly what I'm going to need. The fish aren't going to be selective, and I'm going to probably fish the same dry dropper all day long and not bother changing it. Very rarely. However, when I go to some place like the Henry's Fork or the Madison, I've got almost every fly I own in my sling bag, because if there's a hatch situation, which we don't see on our small streams, it's all prospecting. But if there's going to be a hatch situation, I'm going to have every fly I own, and it's a lot. There's way too many. I carry too many flies, so I haven't figured out how to slim down my large trout stream selection yet.
Yeah,
maybe someday.
I suppose there's a comfort, isn't there, in having everything with you?
There is, but there's also a comfort of taking one fly box. That's kind of nice too.
Yeah. I think that's the way I've gone. I was fishing a chalk stream the other day and I didn't change anything. And thankfully it worked out. I was in Italy recently as well. And that little fly box went and it seemed to work just fine. So that's sort of kind of given me confidence in the short term, but I'm due a trip to the Madison. So I'm sure I'll get loaded up there anyway, ready for that one.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to see there.
Yeah. Do you keep a fishing journal?
No, I don't, and I should. And I used to irregularly, and I treasure them, and I'm just not good at it. It for me, it seems that it takes some of the pleasure out of coming back from fishing and feeling obligated to write in a journal. So I don't, and it's a mistake. I shouldn't. I should keep a journal, but I don't.
Yeah, I'm similar.
I think pictures though, and that often will fill in for memories and jogging my memory if I'm writing about something. But I'm not good at journaling. No, terrible.
Yeah, no, I'm similar. I have one for salmon, but I haven't even filled it in from last year yet. And like you say, memories are the thing that I sort of hold on to. And I hope there'll be a time where I'm not able to fish, but I can recall a lot of those memories. Those fish might be a little bit bigger, but that's the way. But then I suppose I could turn that on its head as well and say, well, it would be nice just to read through those memories as well. But I've not felt the need to do it.
I would urge anybody listening to keep a journal. Don't be like me.
Yeah. Let's move on a little bit. So we've talked a little bit about fishing. And since you began fishing, what do you consider the biggest change that you've actually seen?
I think the diversity in fly fishing. I think more women, more young people, more people of color, more different racial backgrounds. I think that's the biggest change I've seen in fly fishing. I mean, it used to be a bunch of old guys who weren't very helpful. They didn't share information, and I love seeing all these young people in fly fishing. And we see, I don't know how it is in the UK, but we see a lot of young people in the States, high school age, 20s, early 20s, and they're wild about it, and they're so innovative, and they appreciate the traditions of fly fishing, but they're not gonna follow tradition all the time. So it's really exciting. It's really interesting.
Yeah. And do you think part of that is down to technology making fishing more accessible for people, making people more aware of it, so that they're seeing actually there are younger people doing this, and that entices more younger people into it?
Yeah, I mean the fly fishing films are what really started the whole youth movement, and that's only grown by leaps and bounds. Social media, which we love to hate, social media has its drawbacks to the fishing world, but it has really made it more accessible, and people can see people that look like them out on a trout stream, and that's huge. That's huge.
That's cool to hear. I think we're slightly different in the UK, and I've had this theory that I've talked about for quite some time, that I think youngsters are exposed to fishing, whatever form that may be, and then they sort of drift away from it for a little bit and then come back to it. And let's say in their late 20s, early 30s, when they have perhaps a working job that they can afford, because obviously we don't have public water. And it made me think that public water, I wonder do you think that's got something to do with it? And are you worried about public land and the fishing that goes with it looking forward as well?
Yeah, I think it is the big difference is that kids here can go fishing anywhere they want. They don't have to pay for it, and not anywhere they want, but most places. I never feel that I'm missing anything, and I only fish public water. I mean, occasionally I'll fish somebody's private land who's a friend or something, but I don't fish private water. I don't like it. I feel like it's cheating. and yeah, I mean, the accessibility of fishing in this country does make a huge difference in the diversity that you see on the water, and the growth of warm water fishing, of bass fishing and carp fishing and pike fishing and gar fishing and all kinds of different species.
And social media has helped these things, I think, be more of a passing trend. And they look, because I think we sort of ripple down from what you guys are doing, and carpers, it's always been there in the background, but it's been really feeding them with dog biscuits or whatever. Right. But now what you guys have been doing, searching out, and I'm heading off in the next 3 or 4 weeks to go stalk carp with gotchas or whatever it may be, pheasant tails, whatever. And that's the first time, and I'm really, really excited about that. And I think that's helped grow these aspects of it. We've got a big scene with mullet over here as well that people are catching, and we've got experts, Colin and Paul and lots of others, catching fish that we thought we couldn't catch before. And we're getting access to that in a more rapid way, aren't we? And can interact with the people more rapidly and easily. That's the big upside of these things, isn't it? Of social media as a whole.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, the downside of social media is people's expectations. They see all these big trout, and then they feel like they're not doing it right, or they're not doing enough, or they feel insecure because they're not catching these big fish that they see on social media. And I think that creates a lot of tension, and that's unfortunate. But for the most part, it's been healthy.
Yeah, and I see what you mean about putting the pressure and fishing. I hate to use the word, but fishing for likes in that sense. And it doesn't, the grip and grin or the fish in the water or whatever is the end product, but it's all this for me. And just before we were on talking, I was watching a guy in Ireland play a salmon, and it was wonderful watching that whole thing as it happened. And it wasn't actually, he wasn't lifting the fish up at the end to show everyone. It just went in the net and the film ended. And I thought that was a really lovely way. We saw the fight and everything that went in with it. And that's what I'm interested in. And, you'll know you've had days, as I have, and many others, where you're getting caught in a tree, a cast isn't working, whatever. And we don't always see that aspect of it. And that's the missing part of that perhaps sometimes can put people under that unneeded pressure, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, people think anglers like yourself and me, we don't get caught in trees, and we don't have bad casts, and we don't have bad days, and we don't get frustrated. And that's they don't see that on social media, and that's definitely not true.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on from there. And we're talking about technology, but I'd like to look at it from a fishing perspective as well. And do you think, the rods, and I know, again, we were talking a little bit about rods off mic, and technology has moved on so it feels rapidly, but it's probably not. But we're seeing these little nuances. Rods are getting lighter, they're getting stronger. Do you think we've almost taken graphite? Let's use rods as an example. Do you think we've taken rods in the short to medium term as far as we can at the moment? And do you think that might be why we're seeing this sort of growth in fiberglass and the reinterest in bamboo as well again as a result of it?
It could be, because we've kind of reached a plateau in graphite in that there aren't any new fibers coming out. For a while, the aerospace industry was developing lots of new fibers and new resin systems to hold the fibers together, and that seems to have plateaued. And so there's two things you can do. One is that you can change your layups. You can change how the graphite is used, and you can mix and match moduli, and you can wrap the graphite crosswise instead of unidirectionally. And but I think fiberglass, the resurgence of fiberglass, and some new interest in bamboo, where we can sell every bamboo rod we make. Of course, we can sell every graphite rod we make these days too. It's tough keeping up. But I think there's going to be another revolution at some point. I think that another fiber will be discovered, or one of the things I've always thought of is there's got to be a revolution in guides, because we're using the same snake guides we used 100 years ago. And there's got to be a better way to direct a fly line along the length of a rod. I don't know what it is. We experimented many years ago with running the fly line up the center of the rod and using all different kinds of guides. But there's got to be something in guides that makes them better, and they haven't changed. So I don't know, but we're in a little bit of a plateau now, but I think something will come up.
Nice. And is it a case then at work that somebody may come up when you're in the main offices at Orvis, that somebody may come up and say, look, we've got this rod, and you all go, this is how I picture it in my little mind anyway, that somebody says, we've got this new rod we're going to try, and you all go out to, I assume you've got a casting pond or whatever it is, and you all try it and talk about it. Is that how it might work, or how it does work perhaps?
Yeah, well, usually there's an idea. First, there's an idea. We need a rod that's short and stiff, or we need a certain line size and length for a purpose. So we're creating a rod for a purpose, and then the rod designers go in and use their math skills and their physics skills, and come up with a couple of prototypes. Then we build them, and then they're cast on the pond. And short and long cast. You don't just evaluate a rod with a 70-foot cast. You evaluate it with a 30 and a 25-foot cast as well. And only after that point do they then go out to guides. They go out to people in the field who are actually fishing the rod. If it's saltwater rod, we want them to really crank on some big fish and see if they can break them. Although we break a lot of rods in our rod shop. We have a machine that breaks rods, and we know what kind of stresses we can put on a rod before it goes out. And then, you might go through 5, 6, 7, a dozen iterations of a particular rod model before it's finalized. And usually there's one person, we use right now, Dave Perkins, one of the owners of the company, who's retired, but he still has to bless every new rod model. And he's a brilliant caster. It's very subjective, right? Fly rod action is very subjective. So you have to have one person or two people that have to say, okay, this is it. After it comes back from the field, this is the rod we're gonna make.
Nice. And do you play with all the rods in the range? Just because obviously everything's going to have its own little nuances, isn't it? A small stream rod compared to a 9'6" weight or whatever that may be. So will you look at the whole range, or do you have like a 9 foot for a 5 that you're put together as the first one in that new range that you'll try, or is there a bunch of them that come out at the same time?
There might be a couple. There might be a couple that come out after the initial casting.
Nice. I bet that's great fun. I would love that sort of stuff. And yeah, it must be fascinating. Everyone, because I guess you guys have all got so much experience that you can pretty much pick it up and say, well, a little bit here or a little bit there. Is that how it tends to be? And there's a sage nod between you all?
Yeah, to a certain degree, but it's amazing. You can love a rod on a pond and you can go out in the wind with a big wind-resistant fly and all of a sudden say, this rod is horrible. It takes both. It takes it takes three things. It takes the design, then it takes the pond casting, the kind of the bare bones casting, and then it takes the fishing situation.
Yeah. No, and I suppose the fishing situation's probably for the end user almost the most important bit, isn't it? That it's being used by guides, it's being used by people all day, every day, isn't it?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nice. Let's move on to you, Tom. And I just wondered about, you've helped and advised so many people in fishing through your books, the podcast, articles, everything else. But is there a person who had the biggest impact on you in this industry and your fly fishing?
Yeah, I think there is, Pete. It was when I was a teenager, when I was 13, 14 years old. There was a gentleman named Carl Coleman that had a fly shop near where I grew up in Rochester, New York, and he stole my flies in his shop, and I drove him crazy. I would call him on the phone all the time and ask him all kinds of questions, and every once in a while he'd take me fishing. He was a brilliant angler. He is a brilliant angler. He's still alive. He's still guiding. I think he must be about 80. Yeah, he taught me a lot. And he taught me things that I still use every day in my own thinking. He was a brilliant nymph angler, and this was before the days of Euro nymphing or strike indicators. It was upstream, floating line, watch the tip of the line with a heavy nymph kind of fishing. But he was really influential in my education, as well as lots of books. People like Joe Brooks and Vince Marinaro and Charlie Fox and Skewies or Skewies. How do you Skews? Skews and Frank Sawyer. I read a lot of the UK authors because I thought they had a lot of great stuff to say, and so reading was important.
Yeah. Do you think that's lost? I suppose we're circling a little bit. Do you think that's lost a tiny bit because of the world that we live in now? Whereas, let's say pre-internet times, the way I would find out something is reading from a magazine. If Charles Jardine brought out a book, if Pete Cockrell, whoever it were, and I'd eagerly buy that book and read it. Is it slightly different now that process is a little bit more rapid?
I think it is. Yeah. I mean, what do we do when we have to put a new burner on our grill or change the headlight in our car? We go to YouTube, right? Yeah. It's wonderful. YouTube is incredible for figuring out how to do just about anything. And but books are still pretty strong. People still want books, and I know that the physical book market is growing more rapidly than the electronic book market at the current time. Not just fishing books, but in general. Fishing books aren't very good electronically unless it's a book of essays, because the visuals are so important, and visuals on a Kindle are pretty lame. But they're still selling. They're certainly not as important as they were. when I meet people at a show, or when I meet them on the river, and they say they sometimes say, "Oh, I love your books." They usually say, "I love your videos," or "I love your podcast."
Yeah, yeah. And the podcast is almost a talking book in some respects, isn't it? That you have the fly box to start with, then the interview.
Yeah.
That there is a way of that's in effect. Instead of sitting down, you can be going about your busy life listening to these things. And I guess that's where this explosion in podcasts across just about any subject you can think of has happened, doesn't it? It must be where things are aiming towards, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm always blown away by people that say, "I've learned so much from your podcast, and I learned how to fly fish from your podcast." I'm thinking, Jesus, it's such a visual sport, and how can you learn that much from a podcast about fly fishing? But they claim they do, and I'm always amazed by it and flattered by it, but just amazed that people can learn so much from a podcast.
Yeah, yeah, and it's great news you say about the books as well. And I was talking to the printer who prints our magazine just the other day, and he was saying that demand for paper and it was led, I think, by people reading more during lockdowns and more print stuff. So the paper mills, and in Europe, I don't think there's many at all. And they're not putting prices down. I'm looking at another 15% rise for the next issue that's going up because the demand's so strong. So the mills aren't going to put their prices down. So in some respects, it's great news because, the hashtag I always use is print's not dead. And it's thrilling to hear that, although financially it's not quite as pleasing.
I know I read more magazines now than I ever did at any other time in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. You started with Orvis from college, and the relationship is still going strong. What do you think is the reason for it lasting so long? And you've done such a wide range of things within the company. I'm guessing you're just enjoying it as much as you always have.
I am. There's been a lot of luck involved, and Orvis has always been it's always been family held, and it's kind of a homegrown company where there aren't a lot of people with MBAs there. In fact, MBAs never impressed Lee Perkins, who was Simon, the current CEO's grandfather, who I started working for. He could care less if somebody had an MBA. He wanted to know what their work experience was and what their personality was and what kind of network they had and how they related to people. And so it's been a place where you can do different things. There's always an opportunity that comes up. And I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time, I think. I don't know what else I would have done with my life because I don't know much else other than fly fishing. So, I could have worked for a marketing company, I guess, but I've just been very, very fortunate, Pete.
Yeah, that sounds really.
Orvis has been good to me. Orvis has been, patient with me, and I owe everything to that company. They've given me such great opportunities to do some wonderful, wonderful things and see some wonderful places and meet wonderful people.
So you said about fly fishing and your long relationship with Orvis. Was it always going to be fly fishing for you then? Did you sort of, you were tying flies commercially from a very young age? Did that sort of set the tone for your career and you knew that you would look in fly fishing as your career?
No, I wanted to be a fish biologist. That's what I wanted to be, a trout biologist. And that I got a bachelor's of science and realized that I really needed a master's degree to do anything interesting, whether to teach or to be a fish biologist in the field. And I didn't have the money to go back to college, so I took the job at Orvis with the intent of making enough money to go back to grad school. Well, you know how that worked out. So So I never thought I would have a career. I mean, I would have. It, I was never very good at planning my life. Honestly, I kind of let things happen. I never had an agenda or a good plan for what I was going to do. I think I finally do now, but it took a while to get there.
Yeah, it looks like it worked out okay.
Yeah, it worked out fine. Nobody's crying for me.
We're going to move on to your books. And as I said in the introduction, you've written over 20 of them now. Is there one you're the most proud of? And is there one that you'd really like to write that you haven't yet?
There's two that I'm most most proud of. One is called Prospecting for Trout, which is how to fish for trout when there's no hatch. But that's an older book, and I just recently delivered a manual. Well, it's actually in copy editing now, called Finding Trout, which is kind of like prospecting for trout, but it's more about how to actually find a trout stream in places like the States where you have a lot of public water and you're able to explore how to find a trout stream. And then it goes into a lot of currents and hydraulics and how trout feed and how to find them in the stream. So it's like reading the water and actually finding a stream and then going to the stream and reading the water. But the two that are currently around, the Prospecting for Trout and my small stream book, Small Stream Fly Fishing. I'm pretty proud of the pictures that were in the Small Stream book. It was published by Rizzoli, who is, they do a lot of beautiful art books, and it's a large format hardcover. Pictures came out really, really well. And I think that's maybe my most helpful book for people. So those are the two, I think.
And how do you tend to feel when that book is about to hit the streets? Because I know I'm looking at a large number of magazines that we've just packed and are going to go out, and I always get a little bit nervous when it starts landing with readers, because you want them to enjoy it as much as you have and the work that you've put into it. Do you get nervous about those sorts of things as well and everything that goes with it? Because I guess somebody like yourself can do book tours and everything else too, and visit the Orvis stores and elsewhere, and a new books live as well.
Oh, I don't do that. Book signings are wretched. I mean, nobody wants to go to a book signing. Believe me. Whenever I visit a store, I say, no, we're not going to do a book signing. People want to bring in books, I'll sign them, but we're going to do a presentation or we're going to have a question and answer. I'm not doing a book signing because it's deadly. It's awful. Fishing book. You don't do book signings with fishing books. I'm sorry. It's a stupid idea. So I don't do book tours. It wouldn't be worth a publisher to send me on the road to do a book tour. What was the other part of the question? Oh, do I get nervous when the book's coming out? Not really, because I make sure that I get a decent enough advance on the book that I'm financially gratified. And if it sells or not, who cares? People want to read it, they read it. I try to do books that people want to read. I don't do the books that I want to do. I do the books that I think people have questions about and want to learn about. I don't. That's why I've never written a book of essays on fishing, esoteric stuff, because I don't really enjoy most of those. and I don't know. I just don't. I write how-to stuff because it sells better.
Yeah, perfect answer, really, isn't it? I was going to ask you about traveling, and you've traveled really extensively. Is there a place that has really gotten under your skin that you thought, yeah, this could be the one?
Well, I love bone fishing in the Bahamas as far as traveling. I really like the people, the country, the ecosystem. It's very pristine, and the fishing is wonderful there. It's varied. They're both small fish and large fish, and quantities of fish, and trophy fish. So I really love the Bahamas, and the Western United States, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho. It's hard to beat. It's hard to beat that fishing.
Yeah, here I'm with you on the west. I've never really fished much of the east side, and I was fascinated. I think you've had him on as a guest, Mark Kalansky, and took his book Salmon, and the salmon runs that you had along the east side of the United States were absolutely extraordinary. And I've said before on the podcast, if anyone wants to read, they really should read it. It's a fabulous book, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is fabulous. I'm a big fan of Mark Kurlansky's writing anyways. I never even knew he was a fly fisher until the salmon fishing book came out. And that was pretty cool because I've read, I think, all of his books, not any of his fishing books, but he's written a couple of fishing books, but most of his other nonfiction I really admire.
Yeah, I'm just reading his other one just at the moment, his other fly fishing book at the moment, which is great. Is there somewhere you haven't visited that you would really love to?
Yeah, I've never been to New Zealand, and for a trout angler, New Zealand seems like it would be heaven. Never been to the Seychelles, given my love for bone fishing. I could care less about giant trevally, but I think they're just a big jack. But the bone fishing in the Seychelles sounds really interesting, or just some other remote place where there's bonefish that haven't been fished very much. I'd like to, because I love bone fishing because I love stalking and I love sight fishing.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I was thinking about when you talked about the Bahamas, and I've only fished down in Agua and with Ezard, and it was the only time I felt greed in my fly fishing career that we were walking a flat about, it must be a football pitch or a soccer pitch size, and there were tails everywhere. And I was hooking a fish, looking at the next one, thinking, where's the next one? And it was the most amazing.
I'm that way about every time I go fishing.
It was just amazing seeing those tails everywhere. And I don't know I'll ever see that again. As far as it's in my mind, and this is exactly, folks, why you need a journal. So I can say, well, because in my mind now, there were tails wherever I looked, and there were tailing bonefish everywhere. It was absolutely phenomenal. But I wanted to move on also to steelhead and talk a little bit about that, because for me, it's more akin to salmon fishing, and I find it really special. I know you do steelheading. Do you enjoy it? And for our listeners, I've had some steelhead guides on here previously, friends that I've known, but how would you describe steelhead to UK listeners?
Boring.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I steelhead fish and I enjoy it when I go, but I really prefer sight fishing. And I know there's that anticipation, but covering a lot of water with casts just is not my thing. If it was sight fishing for steelhead with a dry fly, that'd be a different story, but it's not usually the case. And I enjoy stalking fish, and I enjoy sight fishing. A friend of mine, well-known angler, once called me a predator, and I took that as the greatest compliment. So yeah, I mean, if I had a choice between going saltwater fishing somewhere and going steelheading, there would be no contest. I'd go saltwater fishing. Absolutely.
Nice. That's good.
Yeah, I'd take trout fishing over steelhead fishing. But, there's a time of year when, in the late fall in this part of the world, when it's about all there is that's very interesting. So I do it. But
yeah. And what about spey casting then? Do you enjoy that aspect of it?
I enjoy it, but I'm not very good at it. I'm pretty much of a hacker at two-handed casting, which is great because it's something new to me. It's something new to learn, and we do a lot of trout spey over here, just fishing soft tackles or small streamers for trout with a light 3 or 4 weight two-handed rod. And it's something new, just like Tenkara, something new. And to me, Euro nymphing was something new. So it's enjoyable because I'm still learning, and I love learning. So, but I'm not really good at it.
It was interesting you mentioned trout spey because I'm sure there are some applications. I can see them in the US. There are some applications in the UK. And then you mentioned Tenkara, which, again, has a core following of it, but it's something that never really, and I get it, I really do. And funnily enough, trout spey, it was in my mind, I was going to bring this up with you. And I wondered if trout spey may be a similar sort of thing that's a passing thing. And then you mentioned Euronymphing, which in some respects people may call it in trout fishing or grayling fishing or whatever, a game changer. So that I think is with us to stay, whereas the other two have sort of driven. Do you think that? Yeah.
No, I don't. I think they're here to stay too. I think they're here to stay. I think one of the pleasures of fly fishing is fly casting, and to be able to cast a different way with a different kind of rod for trout. Swinging flies for trout with a trout spey rod is probably not the most effective way to catch them usually, but it's an interesting and new and different way of doing it.
Yeah, I could see it working for streamers and being an interesting way of fishing streamers. Beyond that, I don't, like you say, soft hackles or whatever it may be. But like you say, I'd rather fish differently, I think, other than possibly streamers. But I watched that one with great interest to see if it catches on over here in any meaningful way.
Yeah.
But
a lot of your rivers are not really conducive because you need a big long riffle, and in the UK, I mean Scotland and Ireland, I'm sure you have rivers that would work, but in the UK, the rivers that I've seen doesn't look like it would be very effective.
Yeah. That segues really nicely because I was going to ask you if you fish much in the UK.
Not enough. I love fishing in the UK. It's just the tradition and the history, and I grew up fishing what we call a spring creek, which you call a chalk stream. That's where I learned really how to fly fish. And so I just love the ecosystem of a spring creek. I'm fascinated by the ecosystem. And so, I fished the test, the Itchen, the Piddle, the Derbyshire Wye, which I thought was a fascinating little stream. Never fished in Ireland or Scotland. Never been to Ireland or Scotland. I love the fishing over there. I don't love the reservoir fishing. Barry Unwin took me reservoir fishing once, and it was more or less a joke to the both of us.
You mentioned earlier the Catskills, and that's entwined in fishing folklore and history. Yeah. Did you get a sense of the history when you first went to fish those chalk streams like the Test and the Itchen?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. It was part of the appeal was all the history that's happened on those streams. I mean, it's where we got most of our fly fishing tradition from in this country. So to see one step removed from even the Catskills, because the Catskills borrowed traditions and techniques from your chalk streams, and then to see where it all came from was a real thrill.
Yeah, it's pretty special, isn't it? To, like you say, to see those fish, and the Derbyshire wye you use as a great example. It must have been kind of fun catching rainbows there as well.
It was, I mean, I think it's one of the few streams that you have wild reproducing rainbows, and my river in my backyard has wild reproducing rainbows in it. So it was, and it's not that dissimilar to the Derbyshire wye. It's about the same size, doesn't have the weed growth, but yeah, it was a real thrill to catch a wild rainbow in the UK.
Yeah, and that's where probably some of the oldest tradition is still in place there, really, more so, although of course there is plenty on the Test and the Itchen, but the fishing etiquette on the Derbyshire wye with upstream dry fly only, no emergers, it's sort of kept itself hidden away from civilization and moving on. It's kept those rules all of that time, and it is a lovely nod to tradition, I guess, in some respects.
Oops, I didn't know that. I fished nymphs and emergers when I was there, but there was nobody around when I fished it. So.
You'll find nobody's listening, Tom, anyway, so you'll be absolutely fine.
Damn yank.
So we've been talking nearly an hour now, actually, and I wanted to ask you, because you've given this is really probably a difficult question to answer, but if there's one piece of advice you'd pass on to listeners today that you've taken from fly fishing, what would it be?
Don't take it too seriously and make it fun. We all tend to take it way too seriously, and it's a really stupid thing that we do. We're trying to stick a hook in a fish's mouth with some little feathered creation, and we jerk it around and torture it, and then we let it go. It's really stupid. And so if you overthink it too much, you're going to give up. So don't overthink it. And remember that it's supposed to be fun, and don't question why it's fun so much. Just enjoy the moment.
I think that's a perfect answer. I'd like to say a huge thank you for being a guest today, but also for everything you've done for our pastime. And, I know you reach a lot of people in the US and beyond there, but also the UK, and it's influenced me. I was showing you that I had one of your copies of your book that helped me through fly tying. It's a wonderful, there's plenty ahead with books and everything else, but it must be a wonderful feeling to have influenced and helped so many people on their fly fishing journeys. And I'm speaking as one of those people too.
It is. It's very satisfying, Pete. And, it flatters me every day when someone says they learned something from me. I try never to forget where I came from and when I was learning new things, and I was completely clueless. And so it's always flattering to hear those things. Thank you.
How can people find you? I'm sure everyone listening to this one listens to your podcast, but how can people find you on social media, on the podcast and everything else, if they haven't already?
I don't do social media. I stopped doing Facebook after the 2016 elections, and I stopped doing Instagram a year and a half ago or so because I just felt like I was spending way too much time looking at my phone. So I do read Instagram and I do comment, but I don't post. I rarely post something. The best place is my podcast or the Orvis Learning Center, where we have all our videos parked. It's howtoflyfish.orvis.com, which is kind of a correspondence course in learning to fly fish, and the podcast.
Fantastic. And if people haven't listened to it, Tom gives so much information. He has a section called the Fly Box beforehand, where he answers listeners' questions or questions via the phone, and then has an interview afterwards. I'm sure, as I said, if you're listening to this, you've already listened to it, but it is the daddy of fly fishing podcasts. So it's definitely worth a listen if you haven't already. Tom, it's been absolutely fantastic to speak to you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with me today. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed it.
Well, Pete, I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I hope your listeners took something away from it that will allow them to have more fun when they're fishing.
Thank you so much. Everyone, this has been the Fly Culture Podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as me, and as ever, there'll be plenty more coming very, very soon.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.